All right, kids, last week we started our second part of the weather unit where we were looking at weather instruments. Do a quick review here before we really start rolling things out pretty quickly here with newer instruments. I need to go back and finish this, I guess, but with everybody having a Nearpod code, I don't want to mess that up, but there's a gift there of a thermometer. But why is a thermometer important? Well, I mean, I think the past couple of days have shown us why a thermometer is important. So the first thing we need to talk about is the definition. Is a thermometer is something that measures the air temperature. Remember, a thermometer is something that can measure the temperature in something. We talked about using thermometers in cooking, and we can measure the temperature in like the chicken or the meat or the steak that we're cooking to make sure it's up to temperature. When we were studying chemical and physical changes, we measured the temperature inside of our experiments to see if there was a temperature change, which many times led us to it being a chemical change when we did that. Not all the time, but some of the times. And then for this week, we learned that the thermometer is going to measure the temperature in the air. And why is that important? Well, over the last couple of days, when the temperature in the air has dipped below 32 degrees, we've received a little bit of snow, a little bit of ice, a little bit of sleet. We even had a delay of school due to the temperatures being so low because they were worried that some of the water that was on the surface could even freeze and cause slippery and dangerous driving conditions. So a thermometer is something that you would use daily in your forecasting and of the weather and looking at current weather conditions. If the past couple of days have been 70 degrees, I don't think we would have had any issues at all. Just been some rain and we would have moved on. And some of this would have evaporated a lot faster because the heat would have been a little higher. And then the sun shines during the day and it would have been very nice. So thermometer is something very important that we need to know. And so let's move on to the next one. And I think we said with this one, put a star beside it. It's probably one of the most important. And the reason why it's most important for us is they find multiple ways to pull questions out of the barometer. They find many, many different ways to pull the questions about what the barometer does, and then once the barometer does its job, how does that predict upcoming weather? Now, if you look at the barometer here, many people have had some issues reading the font on here. I can kind of see that. But right here would be kind of, in the middle here. And you notice that when we're here, you can go ahead and start noticing there's probably going to be a change in weather, and it depends on if the pressure goes down or if the pressure goes up. And so we have high pressure and we have low pressure on our barometers, and both of those mean something very, very important. You'll notice here, if I start to go lower on here, I start to get to where it's going to rain, and then where it's stormy, but if I start to get higher, it's fair and very dry. So let's take a look at some notes for that. So we have our definition of the barometer here, that it measures air pressure. And we know that there are high pressures and there are low pressures that move in and out of different areas. And when you have a high pressure, it means something very specific. When you have a low pressure, it means something very specific. If you're ever watching the weather, you might see this big blue H on the weather map. That is a high pressure weather system symbol. Well, what does high pressure mean? Well, high pressure means, if you notice it starts with an H, it means happy weather. Happy weather is when it's clear, cool, and sunny. Now, when I say cool in January is very different than cool in August. Cool in January could even mean like the past couple of days where it dipped into the lower 30s. Cool in August might mean like an 88-degree day. That's still pretty warm, but compared to 95 or 100 with high humidity, that's very, very different. So when a high pressure system rolls in, you can expect happy weather. Well, what does that mean? The sky's going to be clear, it's going to be very sunny, and it's going to be a little bit cool outside. If you see a high pressure weather system moving in, you're going to be able to go outside and hang out that day. Conversely, if you see this big red L on a weather map, you have a low pressure system moving in. Low pressure starts with an L. Lousy starts with an L. Low pressure systems mean lousy weather. That means it's warm, humid, rainy, and stormy when you have low pressure systems moving in. That's something that you definitely want to write down and have in your notebooks and notes. You want to refer back to that very often, and we're going to see that show up many, many, many times in different question formats on the tests and quizzes. So again, if you're going through the Nearpod slides, here are your notes on the barometer. Now we're going from maybe one of the most intense and most difficult of the weather instruments to really develop a deep understanding of, to probably one of the easiest, if not the easiest one of all, and that is a rain gauge. That is a rain gauge. Well, what does a rain gauge do? It's probably exactly what you think it does. It measures the amount of rain that has fallen over a specific time period. Now that's the part that's kind of important. I'm going to go back to this here. If I look here, I'm going to say it's rained about 2 inches here. That's pretty much where that's at. You can't leave the rain gauge out for like 8 days and tell me how much it rained on Tuesday. Okay, that's where it comes to this thing of how much has fallen over a specific time period. Now, if you're judging how much it rained every week, sure, you would check your rain gauge once a week. But typically we want our weather in shorter time increments than that. So we would actually measure it daily and at the same time each day. So that's the specific time period portion of that. Because then you can say, okay, in the last 24 hours, it has rained half an inch, 0, whatever it is. And then you can add those numbers up to get the weekly totals, and then even add those numbers up to get the monthly totals, and add all of them up to get the yearly totals, and so forth. But you do need to do that on a very specific time period. But typically that's going to be over a 24-hour period. So we have rain gauge. Pretty easy though. How much rain has fallen over a specific time. A wind vane, also called a weather vane. You might hear both. Now, this one I think is honestly kind of easy too. You typically see these on tops of houses, on old barns. You might see them a lot. But it's kind of weird here. I see the north, south, the east, and the west. And I noticed that this rooster is pointed, it looks like he's pointed to the east. And when I see that, it kind of gives me an idea of what the wind vane or the weather vane does. And it's not really stretching it if you've already kind of guessed ahead. If you're saying, Mr. Bowens, I think that tells me that the direction of something. Well, what is that something that it's measuring the direction of? Happens to be the wind direction. The wind direction. And again, that can be a very important thing as well. Depending on where the winds are coming from, it could be bringing in cooler air or warmer air. And we see that often with us when things are blown in from the south. It's typically warmer with more moist air. It's blown in from the north, typically cooler and drier air. It just depends on where it's coming from. But if you would use a wind vane to tell me what direction it is coming in. Now, you need to be very careful because there's some other things that we do with wind that you can easily get mixed up. And you don't want to do that. And I just do that. Just moving the mouse. So again, when you start to see a wind vane, remember the wind vane, also called a weather vane in some of the questions, measures the wind direction. An anemometer. This is what an anemometer looks like. This part on top is actually a wind vane as well, but this little spinning thing here is an anemometer. And you can kind of start taking some guesses as to what that might be doing. Why would that be moving around in circles? If it's outside, what would be moving it? Well, it's not the heat from the sun. So we're not measuring temperature. It's not that the rain is hitting that and spinning it in circles. So we're not measuring rain. That is measuring the wind. And the faster it blows, the harder the wind is blowing. The slower it moves, the slower as the wind is blowing. So what does an anemometer actually do? An anemometer measures wind speed. It measures the speed. So people often get the anemometer and the wind vane mixed up on quizzes and tests. So you just kind of have to memorize the wind vane is direction. The anemometer measures wind speed. You'll notice these little cups, how they're kind of concave. They catch the wind, and that's what moves the anemometer around like that. And you can, depending on which one you have, some of them, how fast they spin, it moves a little dial up the shaft of the anemometer, and it tells you approximately what the wind speed is. That's the handheld ones that we have in class. And then some of those that are like this one, more than likely, if you can tell here, probably has like some kind of a wire that's attached to something electronic that tells the reader exactly how fast the wind is blowing. So anemometer is going to measure the wind speed. Weather maps. Okay, we see these very often. You cut on the news, WXII, here's a big giant map of North Carolina. And what do you see moving over top of it? Well, you see different types of weather. You might see low pressure, high pressure. You might see something like this, which is going to be your storm clouds. They might show the cloud cover for the day. They might show the temperature that's going to show up. It is going to be a weather map. Weather maps show the atmospheric conditions. Now, again, that could be in the atmosphere. It could be the heat, so it could be the temperature. It could be the rain. It could be the wind speed. It could be the wind direction. It could be the high pressures and low pressures. It just depends on what portion or other instrument they're using in conjunction with the weather map to show you the atmospheric conditions over that portion of the Earth's surface. Meteorologists use these very often to forecast the weather, and they kind of show you what's going on. When there's a tornado moving through, you can watch the news and you can kind of see that they'll zoom in, not even just like to the state, but like almost to the roads, exactly where they think that the turning and the rotation might be where a possible tornado could be, and they watch that, and they give people warning ahead of time because they know which direction, and they again are using your anemometers and your wind vanes to tell the speed and direction of the storm and where it's going, and they watch all that, and they kind of give people forewarning to go ahead and take shelter if they're at a certain area. And again, a lot of that's shown using the weather maps. Then that's used in conjunction with other weather instruments as well. Our next weather instrument, when you first look at it, sort of looks like a barometer at first glance if you're looking at this. But I'm looking down here and it's reading a percent here, and I'm wondering what a hygrometer is. I kind of hate that it's not called a hydrometer, because if it was a hydrometer, we would know it's hydro is water, and we'd say, oh, it's measuring something about water, and then we could remember that it's measuring the amount of moisture in the air. But a hygrometer is what does that. It measures the humidity. And you know what humidity is because you have felt it before. You know those summer days when you walk outside and literally walking from the front door of the house to the car, you already start sweating. One of the reasons because of that is because there's so much moisture in the air. And again, a lot of that has to do with if it's super hot outside, there's a lot more evaporation going on. Evaporation means water is turning to vapor, and that water vapor is in the air, and that's going to raise the humidity. Now, there are some things where we're talking about relative humidity, and we're not going to have to get into all that, thank goodness. That should not show up at all. We just need to know that a hygrometer measures the humidity, and when there's a lot of humidity in the air, we have the chance of a lot of more clouds forming, and if clouds are forming on a summer day, we have the chance of storms moving in. So we typically kind of watch the humidity as well. And you can tell if it's going to be a high humidity day, it's not a nice day to be outside, working in the garden or hiking or anything, as compared to a day of low humidity. And whoops, sorry about that. You can actually look at the hygrometer and then go back and look at your high pressure and low pressure and really start to forecast what the day might be like. So a low pressure day with high humidity, you're probably going to have storms. High pressure day is probably going to be low humidity, and you're going to have nice clear skies. They kind of go together. So if you look at our vocabulary for the week, that really, let me pull that up really quickly here. Nope, that's the wrong one. It is this one. There we go. So we have anemometer, wind speed, barometer. We have something that measures air pressure, hygrometer, humidity. Precipitation, that's an older word, something that, anytime you have any type of water that falls from the sky. And over the last couple of days, we've seen three types. We've seen rain, we've seen sleet, and we've seen snow. The only thing we haven't seen is hail, and that typically happens in storms. We talked about a rain gauge. We've talked about temperature as the measurement of heat in an object, and we talked about thermometers that measures heat. Weather, what the lower atmosphere, troposphere, is like at any given time and place. Climate, and we'll get into climate and weather pretty soon, and then weather vane and weather maps. So pretty much covered all the words, almost all of them today. We'll get into the difference in climate and weather probably tomorrow, and we'll definitely have our quiz on all of this Friday because this is pretty simple if you think about it. Anyway, if you have any questions, concerns, or anything like that, send me a message in Google Classroom. Otherwise, have a good day. Don't forget to subscribe and smash the like button. Later.